The lecture hall fell silent as Professor Valtine dimmed the ambient lighting, her crystalline form refracting the soft glow into 1,000 dancing prisms across the curved walls of the xenobiology wing. Before her sat 200 of the Galactic Consortium's brightest young minds, representing 47 species from across known space, all gathered for the most anticipated course at the Academy, Deathworld Studies. Among them, 3 human exchange students sat quietly in the back row, their presence barely noticed by their alien classmates who whispered excitedly about finally learning the truth behind the legends. The humans exchanged knowing glances, a mixture of amusement and something deeper, something sadder, flickering behind their eyes. Professor Valtine's voice resonated through the translation implants embedded in each student's consciousness, bypassing language entirely to convey pure meaning. She had taught this course for 60 cycles, had seen thousands of students pass through these halls, but never before had actual humans been present for the revelation. She felt an unusual tremor of uncertainty ripple through her usually composed demeanor. The holographic display behind her flickered to life, showing a beautiful blue marble suspended against the velvet darkness of space, its surface swirled with white clouds, vast oceans catching the light of a yellow star. Earth. Even the name sounded soft, gentle, utterly unremarkable. The students leaned forward, confusion evident in their varied forms of body language. A young Crevathie, her violet skin shimmering with curiosity, raised a tentacle-like appendage. "Professor, forgive my confusion, but this world appears quite hospitable. The atmospheric composition is within acceptable parameters for most carbon-based life, the temperature range seems moderate, and I detect significant water coverage. Surely there must be an error in the classification?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled students. They had expected something dramatic, a world of obvious danger, volcanic hellscapes or toxic atmospheres, not this serene sphere that looked almost inviting in its tranquil beauty. The professor's form pulsed with what those familiar with her species recognized as grim amusement. She had anticipated this reaction, had witnessed it countless times before, but knowing the humans were present made her words carry additional weight. "Class, your assessment of Earth's surface conditions is accurate. By standard consortium metrics, Earth falls well within habitable parameters. In fact, by many measurements, it ranks as exceptionally pleasant." She paused, letting the confusion deepen before continuing. "The designation of Deathworld does not refer to surface conditions alone. It refers to the evolutionary pressure cooker that shaped every single organism on that planet into something the rest of the galaxy was entirely unprepared for." She expanded the hologram, and suddenly the peaceful blue world transformed into a cross-section revealing layers of violent geological activity. Earth's crust floats on an ocean of molten rock, constantly shifting, colliding, tearing apart. The planet experiences thousands of seismic events daily. Volcanic eruptions reshape continents. The atmosphere itself is violently unstable, generating storm systems that would tear apart the cities of most consortium worlds. But these are merely the stage upon which Earth's true horror unfolds. She noticed several students shrinking back in their seats, while the humans remained still, their faces carefully neutral. The display shifted again, this time showing Earth's evolutionary timeline compressed into a visual cascade of species rising, thriving, and dying. Earth has experienced 5 mass extinction events, catastrophes that wiped out between 70 and 95% of all life each time. Asteroid impacts. Volcanic cataclysms. Ice ages that locked the entire planet in frozen death. Atmospheric poisoning from the first photosynthetic organisms that filled the air with corrosive oxygen. And yet, life did not simply persist, it exploded back with greater diversity, greater lethality, greater adaptation than before. Every organism on Earth is descended from the survivors of multiple apocalypses, shaped by selection pressure so intense that it would be considered biological warfare on most civilized worlds. A Therian student, his insectoid mandibles clicking nervously, spoke up. "Surely, Professor, this is true of many worlds. Evolution is universal, adaptation common. What makes Earth so exceptional that it earns such a dire classification? His compound eyes reflected the holographic display in fractured repetition, each facet showing a different angle of the beautiful, terrible world before them. Several other students nodded or made equivalent gestures, clearly thinking the professor was overstating the case for dramatic effect. Professor Valtine's form darkened, her usual luminescence dimming to something more somber. Because, dear student, Earth did not simply create life capable of surviving. It created life that thrives on competition, on violence, on the consumption of other life as the primary energy source. Nearly every Earth organism is either predator or prey, often both simultaneously. Their entire planetary ecosystem is built on a foundation of death feeding life feeding death in an endless, ruthless cycle. She pulled up images now, creatures from Earth's oceans and lands, and the classroom fell into stunned silence. The students stared at teeth, claws, venom, camouflage, armor, weapons evolved into flesh, each adaptation more horrifying than the last, a species who had evolved on gentler worlds. The holographic display cycled through Earth's predators with methodical precision, each image more disturbing than the last to the assembled alien students. A great white shark, its rows of serrated teeth designed to saw through flesh and bone. A saltwater crocodile, unchanged for millions of years because its design had achieved lethal perfection. A polar bear, deceptively beautiful in its white fur, capable of decapitating a seal with a single swipe. The consortium students watched in growing horror, their various forms of expressing distress creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, color changes, and pheromone releases that filled the lecture hall with the unmistakable scent of fear. These creatures, Professor Valtine continued, her voice steady despite the reaction she was witnessing, represent only the megafauna, the obvious threats. Earth's true lethality exists at every scale, from the microscopic to the massive. The display shifted to show viruses and bacteria, magnified thousands of times, their alien geometry somehow more terrifying than the teeth and claws that had come before. Earth's microbial life is engaged in constant chemical warfare. Organisms produce toxins, antibiotics, acids, and enzymes that dissolve other life at the cellular level. The humans have a saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." On Earth, this is not metaphor but evolutionary fact. Their immune systems are battlefield commanders, coordinating millions of specialized cells in campaigns of biological violence against invaders every single day of their lives. A Zenthari student, her empathic field fluctuating with distress, projected her question directly into the minds of those nearby. How could any sapient species possibly evolve in such conditions? Surely intelligence requires cooperation, stability, the luxury of contemplation rather than constant survival? Her question resonated with the concerns of many in the room. Species who had achieved sapience on worlds where the greatest danger was occasional resource scarcity, where predation was rare and cooperation was the natural state of existence. The very concept of a thinking species emerging from such a hostile environment seemed to contradict everything they understood about the development of civilization. Professor Valtine turned toward the back of the room, her gaze settling on the three humans who had remained silent throughout the lecture. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we should ask them directly. Marcus Chen, Sarah O'Connor, and Jamal Williams have graciously agreed to participate in today's session. Would one of you be willing to share your perspective?" The entire classroom shifted, 200 pairs of eyes, stalks, and sensory organs turning toward the humans with a mixture of curiosity and newly awakened wariness. For the first time, their classmates truly looked at them, really saw them, and what they saw made several students instinctively retreat. Marcus stood slowly, his movements controlled and economical in a way the students now recognized as the grace of a predator. He was not large by human standards, average height, lean build, but to the assembled aliens he suddenly seemed immense, dangerous in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. His eyes, positioned forward in his skull for binocular vision, for tracking prey, scanned the room with an awareness that made several students flinch. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost apologetic, but there was something underneath it, something ancient and unyielding. My ancestors survived 5 ice ages. They hunted megafauna that could kill them with a single blow. They outlasted 12 other human species in a competition so fierce that we still carry their DNA as evidence of our desperate struggle to survive. We are not proud of what we are. We simply are. He gestured toward the holographic display, where images of Earth's predators still flickered. Every creature you see there, we have survived alongside. Many of them, we have driven to extinction, not through malice but through the simple fact that when humans decide something threatens them, they do not stop until the threat is eliminated or they are. We are pursuit predators, class. Do you understand what that means? It means our ancestors would select prey and simply follow it, walking, for days if necessary, until it collapsed from exhaustion. We cannot outrun most animals. We cannot outfight most predators. But we can outlast anything. Our bodies are designed to keep moving long after any reasonable organism would have given up and died. Sarah stood beside him, her presence adding weight to his words. She was shorter, her frame compact with lean muscle, and when she smiled at the classroom it was meant to be reassuring, but several students recoiled at the sight of her teeth, designed for tearing meat. We are also persistence hunters of knowledge. When we don't understand something, we study it, take it apart, rebuild it until we comprehend every aspect of its function. When we encounter a problem we cannot solve, we do not accept defeat. We try again, and again, and again, passing the challenge down through generations if necessary until someone finally breaks through. The same relentlessness that made us apex predators made us scientists, artists, philosophers. We channeled our violence into curiosity, our aggression into innovation. Jamal's voice added a third dimension to their testimony, his tone carrying both pride and sorrow. But make no mistake, we are still what Earth made us. When the consortium first made contact, your diplomats were terrified of us, not because we threatened them but because they could sense what we are underneath the civilization. We carry weapons instinctively. We organize into hierarchies and tribes within minutes of meeting. We assess threats constantly, even in perfect safety. Our entertainment is filled with conflict, violence, struggle because these things are woven into our DNA so deeply that we cannot separate ourselves from them. We tell stories of heroes because we need to believe that our capacity for violence can be directed towards something noble, something worth the cost. Professor Valtine watched the classroom carefully, seeing understanding dawn in various forms across the assembled species. They were beginning to grasp the truth, but she knew the revelation was far from complete. "Class," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "everything you have heard is merely context. Now we must address the central question of this course. How did these apex predators, these survivors of countless extinction events, these persistence hunters who never stop, who never give up, who channel their violence into every aspect of their existence, how did they respond when they finally left their death world and encountered the greater galaxy?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence, and even the humans seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see how their story would be told to the next generation of consortium citizens. The holographic display shifted to show historical records, the kind preserved in the consortium archives with meticulous care, each moment catalogued for future generations to study and learn from. The date marker showed 93 standard years ago, the moment that changed the galaxy forever. A consortium exploration vessel, the Harmonious Discovery, had detected electromagnetic signals from a yellow dwarf star system and diverted to investigate. The crew of 200 scientists and diplomats approached the third planet with excitement and curiosity, eager to welcome another species into the galactic community. They had done this 17 times before, each first contact proceeding according to established protocols, each new species grateful and overwhelmed to discover they were not alone in the universe. Professor Valtine's voice took on a somber quality as she narrated the events. The Harmonious Discovery's crew followed standard procedure. They broadcast greetings in mathematical language, established orbital position to appear non-threatening, and waited for the planet's inhabitants to respond. What they did not understand, what they could not have understood, was that they were being watched by a species that had spent the last century scanning their own skies with desperate hope and existential dread in equal measure. Humans had been listening to the stars, searching for others, and they had been doing so while simultaneously preparing for the possibility that whoever came might be hostile. The display showed Earth's response, and several students gasped at what they saw. Within minutes of the harmonious Discovery's arrival, every military installation on the planet had gone to high alert. Weapons systems that the consortium crew didn't even recognize as weapons had locked onto their vessel. Communications networks had erupted with activity as humanity's fragmented nations attempted to coordinate a response. And underneath it all, broadcast on frequencies the exploration vessel almost missed, came humanity's reply, not in the universal language of mathematics but in dozens of Earth languages simultaneously, each transmission carrying the same desperate message: "We mean you no harm, we come in peace, please do not destroy us." Marcus's voice broke the silence that followed, heavy with emotion. First contact recordings show that it took the consortium crew 47 minutes to understand that we thought they were there to conquer us. 47 minutes of increasing panic on both sides before anyone realized the fundamental misunderstanding. Your people arrived expecting gratitude and wonder. My people responded with every defense protocol we had developed over thousands of years of warfare against each other. We assumed invasion because invasion was what we would have done. We assumed conquest because conquest was written into our history. We could not conceive of a species advanced enough for interstellar travel that did not achieve that advancement through violence. The holographic display showed the moment of understanding, the careful negotiations that followed, the consortium crew's growing horror as they began to comprehend what kind of species they had discovered. Captain Gental's official report, preserved in the archives, appeared as scrolling text beside the visual record. Sarah read it aloud, her voice catching on certain phrases. They ask questions like warriors preparing for battle. They want to know our weapons capabilities, our population, our territorial claims. They speak of peace but their entire linguistic structure is militaristic, filled with metaphors of conflict and competition. Even their children's stories are about struggle, about overcoming threats through violence or cunning. I do not believe they are inherently hostile, but I fear they are inherently dangerous in ways we have never encountered. Professor Valtine interjected softly. Captain Gental recommended quarantine. She believed that allowing humanity into the consortium would be catastrophic, that their violent nature would destroy the peace we had maintained for 6,000 years. Her report was compelling, her evidence overwhelming, and the Consortium Council debated for 3 standard years while humanity waited in isolation, knowing they were being judged, understanding that their future hung in the balance. The weight of those years seemed to press down on the classroom, students imagining how it must have felt to be deemed too dangerous, too violent, too fundamentally wrong to be accepted by the galaxy. Jamal stepped forward, his expression carrying the weight of history. We didn't wait passively. We couldn't. It's not in our nature. While your council debated, we debated too. Our world leaders, scientists, philosophers, they all grappled with the same question: if we are what you say we are, if we are violent and dangerous and shaped by our Deathworld into something the galaxy fears, then what do we do with that knowledge? Some argued we should hide our nature, present a peaceful facade until we were accepted. Others said we should prove our worth through technology, through advancement, through showing we could contribute. But there were others, many others, who said we should simply be honest about what we are and let the galaxy decide if we were worth the risk. The display shifted to show the human delegation that finally appeared before the Consortium Council, and what struck the students was how small they looked, how fragile, standing before representatives of 47 species on a station built to demonstrate the might and majesty of galactic civilization. The lead diplomat, Ambassador Elizabeth Keating, stood without weapons, without armor, without any of the defensive posturing the consortium had expected. When she spoke, her words were recorded and studied in every xenopsychology course in the galaxy. We are the children of a harsh world. We are shaped by violence and struggle in ways that horrify you, and we will not apologize for surviving. But we are also more than our origins. We are artists who weep at beauty. We are philosophers who question our own existence. We are explorers who reach toward the stars not to conquer them but to understand our place among them. We are dangerous, yes, but we are also desperately, achingly hopeful that we can be something more than what our world made us. Professor Valtine's form pulsed with colors that conveyed profound respect, an emotion she rarely displayed. The Council's decision was not unanimous. 14 species voted against human admission, fearing exactly what Captain Gental had warned of. But 33 species voted in favor, not despite humanity's nature but because of something Ambassador Keating said in her closing statement, something that resonated across every culture in the consortium. The professor paused, looking at each of her students in turn before continuing. She said, "Judge us not by what we have been, but by what we choose to become. We have spent 10,000 years learning to overcome our violent instincts. We have built civilizations on cooperation despite our competitive nature. We have created art that celebrates peace despite our warrior heritage. We are still learning, still struggling, still failing sometimes, but we are trying. And if there is one thing humans excel at, it is the refusal to give up, even when the challenge seems impossible. Especially then." The lecture hall's lighting shifted to a deeper hue, matching the somber turn in Professor Valtine's narrative. The holographic display now showed the Kepler station disaster, an event seared into consortium memory with the same permanence as humans recorded their own tragedies. 23 years after humanity's admission to the galactic community, a cascade failure in the station's antimatter containment systems threatened to obliterate everything within a light-minute radius, including the habitat pods holding 17,000 civilians from 9 different species. The evacuation protocols had failed. The containment would breach in 47 minutes. The consortium's best engineers concluded that nothing could be done, and the order was given to withdraw all rescue vessels to minimum safe distance. The human vessel Indomitable was not assigned to the Kepler region, Professor Valtine continued, her voice heavy with the weight of what came next. It was 3 days away at standard cruise velocity. When Captain Maria Santos received the distress call, she understood the mathematics of the situation perfectly. The consortium vessels were retreating, the civilians were trapped, and by the time any properly equipped rescue force could arrive, there would be nothing left to save. Standard protocol, logical procedure, reasonable action. But Captain Santos was human, and she looked at those numbers and saw not an impossible situation but merely an improbable one. The display showed the Indomitable's trajectory change, the vessel accelerating to velocities that pushed its engines beyond safety ratings, beyond design specifications, beyond what any reasonable captain would risk. A Crevathie student, the same one who had questioned Earth's classification earlier, spoke with trembling uncertainty in her voice. "Professor, surely they could not have arrived in time? The physics alone would require speeds that would destroy most vessels, and even if they survived the journey, 47 minutes was insufficient time to evacuate 17,000 beings." Her confusion was evident, the mathematical impossibility of the scenario conflicting with the fact that this was being taught as historical record rather than hypothetical tragedy. Marcus stood again, but this time there was no careful control in his movements, only raw emotion barely contained. Captain Santos pushed the Indomitable to 87% light speed. At those velocities, time dilation meant that while 3 days passed for the rest of the universe, the crew experienced only 41 minutes. They arrived at Kepler Station with 6 minutes to spare by external clocks, and they did not come to evacuate. His voice cracked, and Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder in comfort, but he continued. The ship's chief engineer, a human named Robert Chen, my grandfather, had spent the entire journey preparing a solution that every engineer in the consortium had deemed impossible. They were going to manually stabilize the antimatter containment by flooding it with the Indomitable's own reactor core, creating a feedback loop that would either contain the breach or add the ship's detonation to the station's destruction. The holographic display showed what happened next, and the silence in the lecture hall became absolute. The Indomitable didn't dock or deploy shuttles. It positioned itself directly against the compromised containment section, and 93 human crew members in engineering suits evacuated into the station's infrastructure. They carried tools, power supplies, and absolutely no safety equipment because there wasn't time for safety, wasn't time for proper procedure, wasn't time for anything except the desperate gamble that human stubbornness could overcome cosmic indifference. The display showed them working in conditions that should have killed them instantly, radiation levels that would have incapacitated most species within seconds, but humans, shaped by their Deathworld, had biological redundancies and damage resistance that bought them precious minutes. Sarah's voice joined the narrative, tears streaming down her face in a display of emotion that transfixed the alien students. They had 6 minutes. It took them 11. Every single one of those engineers knew they were dying. The radiation poisoning was catastrophic, cellular destruction occurring faster than their remarkable healing factors could compensate. But they kept working because 17,000 lives were counting on them, because giving up was not something their genetics understood, because Earth had taught them that you fight until you can't anymore and then you fight some more. The display showed the moment of success, the containment field stabilizing, the antimatter breach sealed, and the 17,000 civilians saved. It also showed the 93 humans, their bodies ravaged by radiation, being carried to medical facilities where every doctor knew the prognosis before running a single scan. Jamal's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the perfect acoustics of the lecture hall, every word carried to every student. 12 of them lived long enough to see the people they saved. The rest died within hours. Captain Santos survived for 3 days, long enough to receive the consortium's highest honor for valor, long enough to speak with the families who had been on that station. Her last recorded words were not about her sacrifice or her pain. She said, "We are what our world made us, but we choose what we do with that gift. Today, we chose to be guardians instead of predators. I hope that counts for something." The display faded to black, showing only the names of the 93 crew members scrolling slowly upward, a memorial in light and memory. Professor Valtine allowed the silence to stretch, understanding that some moments required space for processing, for grief, for the transformation of abstract knowledge into emotional understanding. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that transcended translation. The Kepler station incident was not unique. In the 90 years since humanity joined the consortium, there have been 247 similar events. Impossible situations, desperate circumstances, scenarios where logic dictated retreat and survival, and in every single case, humans responded by charging forward into the darkness. They have the highest casualty rate of any consortium species in rescue operations, in disaster response, in any situation where their peculiar combination of stubbornness and self-sacrifice can be applied. They die at rates that horrify us, and they keep volunteering. A Zenthari student, her empathic field overwhelmed by the emotions saturating the classroom, projected a question that resonated with everyone present. Why? Why do they continue to throw themselves into danger? Have they not proven their worth? Have they not earned the right to safety, to the peace that we promised them when they joined our community? Her confusion was genuine, her species having evolved in an environment where self-preservation was the highest virtue, where individual survival ensured the continuation of knowledge and culture. It was not the human students who answered but Professor Valtine herself, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that conveyed profound sadness and equally profound admiration. Because, dear students, humans did not join the consortium to be safe. They joined because they believed, perhaps naively, perhaps hopefully, that their capacity for violence, their refusal to surrender, their genetic inheritance of survival at any cost, could be transformed into something noble. They looked at the galaxy and saw not a place to hide from what they are but a place where what they are might actually matter, where their Deathworld adaptations could protect species who never had to develop such terrible gifts. She paused, looking directly at the 3 humans in the back row. They volunteered to be the consortium's guardians because it gave meaning to their pain, purpose to their violent heritage, and hope that future generations might evolve beyond the need for such sacrifices. They are teaching us that Deathworld species are not mistakes or monsters but merely different, carrying capacities we lack and desperately need when the galaxy reveals its own hostility. The lecture hall remained suspended in contemplative silence, 200 young minds grappling with the weight of revelation. Professor Valtine dimmed the holographic displays until only soft ambient light remained, bringing the focus back to the physical presence of her students, particularly the 3 humans who had sat through their own species being dissected, analyzed, and ultimately honored in ways that clearly left them emotionally raw. She had taught this course for 60 cycles, but she had never felt the truth of it more acutely than in this moment, with actual representatives of Earth's children present to witness how the galaxy was learning to understand them. There is one final piece of context you must understand, Professor Valtine said, her voice softer now, almost intimate despite the size of the lecture hall. The consortium has existed for 6,000 years, maintaining peace through diplomacy, through trade, through the careful balance of species who learned long ago that cooperation yields better outcomes than conflict. We built a civilization on the fundamental assumption that all sapient species would recognize this truth and choose accordingly. And for 6,000 years, we were correct, until we encountered the first species that chose cooperation not because it was logical but because it was hard, not because it came naturally but because they decided their violent nature would not define them. The display flickered back to life, but this time it showed not Earth or disaster or conflict, but something entirely different. Humans working alongside consortium species in research facilities, human doctors treating alien patients with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything the students had learned. Human teachers in consortium schools, human engineers solving problems through collaboration, human artists creating beauty that resonated across species barriers. The images painted a picture of integration so complete that it was easy to forget how recently and controversially humans had joined the galactic community, how close the vote had been, how many had predicted catastrophe. Marcus stood for the final time, but now his composure was fully restored, his voice carrying the measured weight of someone who had thought deeply about what he was going to say. You're all looking at us differently now. I can see it in how you position yourselves, the increased distance, the wariness in your body language. You've learned that we're dangerous, that we carry the genetic legacy of a world that tried to kill us for millions of years, that we're predators wearing the costume of civilization. And all of that is true. But here's what the statistics don't show, what the disaster reports and the casualty lists and the dramatic rescues don't capture: we're also your classmates. We study the same subjects, struggle with the same exams, stress about the same deadlines. We eat lunch in the same cafeteria, attend the same social events, form the same friendships and rivalries that every student experiences. Sarah moved to stand beside him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way that required tremendous courage before an audience that had just learned to fear her species. Before today, how many of you actually thought about where we came from? We were just Marcus, Sarah, and Jamal, the exchange students from Sol System, kind of quiet, kind of intense maybe, but essentially just other students trying to navigate academy life. That's the real story Professor Valtine wants you to understand. Yes, we're Deathworlders. Yes, we're capable of violence and stubbornness and sacrifice that seems insane to species who evolved in gentler circumstances. But we're also capable of being friends, colleagues, partners in research, people you grab coffee with between lectures and complain about Professor Zenthar's impossible assignments. Jamal's voice completed their joint testimony with words that seemed to have been carefully chosen, perhaps planned long before this lecture. Earth made us dangerous, but you are making us better. Every day we spend in the consortium, we learn new ways of thinking, new approaches to problems, new possibilities for what we might become. We're still working through the legacy of our violent past, still struggling with instincts that served us well on Earth but are liabilities in civilized space. But we're also proving that Deathworld traits aren't destiny, that persistence can be applied to peace as readily as war, that stubbornness can mean refusing to give up on cooperation even when it would be easier to retreat into isolation. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the assembled students. In a way, you're all part of an experiment that started 90 years ago when the consortium voted to accept us. You're proving that different kinds of intelligence, forged in different crucibles, can coexist and even enhance each other. Professor Valtine's form brightened, her colors shifting to patterns that conveyed hope and determination. Class, there are currently 4 other Deathworld species at various stages of development, all being monitored by consortium observers, all approaching the technological threshold where first contact becomes inevitable. Based on humanity's example, the Council has revised all protocols for engaging with such species. We approach them not with fear or quarantine recommendations but with understanding that their adaptations, however alien or frightening they may seem, are simply different solutions to survival. We acknowledge that they may never be fully comfortable in our civilization, but we also recognize that our civilization needs the perspectives and capabilities they bring. A Therian student in the front row, the same one who had questioned Earth's exceptional status earlier, raised a manipulator appendage tentatively. Professor, are you saying that the consortium actively seeks out Deathworld species now? That we've changed our entire philosophy based on humanity's example? His voice carried disbelief mixed with something that might have been cautious optimism, a recognition that perhaps the galaxy was larger and more complex than he had imagined. Not merely seeking, but preparing, Professor Valtine confirmed, her voice resonant with conviction. We are establishing integration programs, developing cultural exchange protocols, creating opportunities for Deathworld species to contribute their unique strengths while learning from our own. We are acknowledging that 6,000 years of peace was built on a foundation of similarity, and that foundation, while strong, was also limited. The galaxy is vast and varied, and if we wish to truly claim we represent sapient life in all its forms, we must make room for those who think differently, who approach problems from angles we would never consider, who carry capabilities we desperately need even if they make us uncomfortable. The 3 humans exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication that spoke to the deep bonds forged through shared experience of being perpetually foreign, perpetually watched, perpetually having to prove their worth. Then Sarah spoke once more, her voice carrying a finality that suggested this had always been the point, the central message they had agreed to deliver. We want you to understand something crucial: we don't represent humanity's peak achievement. We're exchange students, average by our species standards, nothing particularly special beyond our willingness to spend a year studying away from home. The heroes are the ones who ran into Kepler Station, who serve on disaster response teams, who work every day to transform our violent heritage into protective capability. But we're here because the future of consortium integration doesn't depend on heroes. It depends on ordinary humans and ordinary aliens learning to see past the surface differences to recognize the shared hopes, fears, and dreams that unite all sapient life. Professor Valtine made a gesture that, across all species present, conveyed completion and satisfaction. This concludes today's session on why Earth is classified as a death world. Your assignment for next class is to engage in conversation with at least one human student, not as a research subject but as a peer. Learn what music they enjoy, what foods they miss from home, what they dream about for their futures. Discover the person underneath the adaptation, the individual beneath the statistics. She paused, her form pulsing with warmth. And perhaps, in doing so, you will understand the most important lesson humanity has taught the consortium, that the measure of a species is not where they come from but what they choose to do with the gifts, however terrible, that their origins provided. As the students filed out of the lecture hall, something remarkable occurred. Instead of maintaining the distance they had established during the lecture, several of them approached the 3 humans. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, they began asking questions, not about violence or disasters or death world classifications, but about Earth's music, about human literature, about what foods they missed and whether the academy cafeteria could possibly recreate them. The barriers of fear, exposed and acknowledged, began to dissolve in the face of genuine curiosity and the universal experience of young people far from home trying to make sense of the galaxy and their place in it. Marcus watched his classmates approach, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as a Zenthari student nervously asked if he could recommend some human music that might resonate with empathic frequencies. Sarah found herself explaining the concept of comfort food to a group of 3 species who had never considered that sustenance could provide emotional support as well as nutritional value. Jamal was drawing sketches of his family's home, trying to convey the concept of seasons to species from planets with stable climates, finding unexpected common ground in the universal experience of nostalgia for familiar places. Professor Valtine remained in the lecture hall long after it emptied, the holographic displays now showing Earth in all its terrible, beautiful complexity. The planet rotated slowly, clouds swirling over oceans and continents, and she thought about the humans who had emerged from that crucible, carrying their scars and their strengths in equal measure. The consortium had feared them, debated them, ultimately accepted them, and now was learning from them lessons that 6,000 years of peace had never taught. That difference was not weakness, that uncomfortable truths could coexist with hope, that the galaxy was richer and stranger and more resilient than anyone had imagined. And somewhere on that blue marble spinning in the holographic projection, new generations were being born, children of Earth who would grow up knowing they came from a death world but would have the opportunity to be something more. They would carry the persistence, the stubbornness, the refusal to surrender that had kept their species alive through ice ages and extinction events. But they would also carry the knowledge that those traits, properly directed, could build bridges between worlds, could protect the vulnerable, could transform violence into compassion and aggression into advocacy. They were the inheritors of both legacies, and the galaxy waited with cautious hope to see what they would choose to become. The lecture hall's lights dimmed to standby mode, but on the holographic display, Earth continued to turn, a monument to survival, a testament to resilience, and perhaps most importantly, a reminder that the harshest origins could give birth to the gentlest hopes. The Deathworld and its children had joined the galactic community, and in doing so, had taught the consortium that peace was not the absence of the capacity for violence but the daily choice to embrace cooperation despite carrying the tools for destruction. It was a lesson the galaxy was still learning, would perhaps always be learning, as humans continued to be exactly what their world had made them while simultaneously reaching for something more, something better, something worth the cost of every sacrifice their ancestors had endured to bring them to the stars.